Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. On this last Monday in November, we have Chapter 13 of the documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey. This chapter taking a look at the world of movies just before the digital takeover. And Mark Cousins, the film historian and documentarian who made the series, joins me again as my co-host. Welcome again, Mark.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks for being here. This was quite a time, the 1990s. And you said early on when I asked you way back what your favorite era of films was, and you said, well, the 1920s and also the 1990s. You thought that was a spectacular era. Why?
I think that lots of people who love the movies think that maybe the golden age was the 40s or the 60s. But when you look at what was happening in the 1990s, I just think it's really wonderful.
What was happening?
In Iran, for example, they started making these humane masterpieces, not about vengeance, not about sex or violence, about quite simple human themes, and they just moved me deeply. So that's one thing. Then if you look what happened in Denmark, Lars von Trier came along and shook up the movies with he and his friends making very daring new types of cinema. So you've got innovation, you've got the humane nature of the Iranian films, but then in North America you've got Tarantino, you've got the Coen brothers, all sorts of stuff. Great diversity, I think, and that period, I think, when we look back, will really shine.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, because I think of the 90s kind of as from the Hollywood standpoint, it's a lot of remakes and a lot of series and a lot of stuff that seemed kind of uncreative to me.
I think you're right.
But you're right about the Tarantinos and the Coen brothers, though.
And Hollywood itself hasn't always, shall we say, been the greatest place for movies.
Which is interesting, because Hollywood, from the beginning, the very beginning of movies, was always kind of ahead of the game.
Yes.
But then it's kind of fallen behind.
It's like a relay race. The baton is passed on to other people.
Right.
And Hollywood passed the baton on. You know, it stuck to it. It found a good thing, a good business model, a good formula, and stuck to it too much. And so other people took over and innovated more. And that happened. Asia constantly challenged Hollywood. But in this period, you're quite right, Hollywood was not where it's at. If you were looking for greatness in Hollywood, you were looking in the wrong place.
Yeah. One interesting thing about this whole series, and what you pointed out, is there was never a time when there wasn't change happening. I mean, now we're talking about the end of celluloid is coming. You know, digital is about to take over, and I don't think people were paying attention a lot to that. That kind of happened and knocked everybody for a loop.
And totally, technology has always driven change. And when you think of when the cameras were really big and when they needed loads of lights, if you were trying to make a film with a child, for example, the child would be quite scared in those contexts, and you need a very strong-willed child like Shirley Temple to be herself within that context. But when cameras got smaller and digital came along and lights got simpler, then you notice children being portrayed in cinema far more honestly, because the child isn't overwhelmed by the kit, the technology. So as the movies grew up and as digital came along, it was possible to film more honestly.
And you could go out in the streets with a small camera.
Which was really exciting.
Handheld camera.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it was a very exciting period.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, let's have a look. Here's the U.S. television premiere of Chapter 13 of The Story of Film and Odyssey, subtitled The Last Days of Celluloid Before the Coming of Digital. Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. You know, we're getting very close to the finish line of our 15-week journey through the documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey. Well, coming right up, we have Chapter 14, which takes a look at movies from the 1990s and looks at directors such as Quentin Tarantino, Baz Luhrmann, and the Coen brothers, filmmakers who are very much driving forces in movie making today. And returning as my co-host is the man who created the series and wrote it, directed it, and narrates it, film historian Mark Cousins. Thanks again for being here, Mark.
Thank you, Robert.
Now, part of the subtitle is reality losing its realness. What does that mean?
Well, think of a filmmaker like Quentin Tarantino, whose work I really admire. He grew up in the era of videotape, for example, and he lived his life. He worked in a video store, lived his life in a video store. And for the first time in movie history, you get people who whose reality has been movies and whose films are about movies. You could say Quentin Tarantino's films are about movies. You could say Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, which came at the beginning of this era, is sort of about movies. You know, it's got lots of movie references in it. You could say that the Coen brothers films are about Preston Sturges films, etc. So for the first time, we've got filmmakers whose reality was a kind of cinema. And of course, we ourselves, from the 1990s onwards, had more screens in our lives with laptops and mobile phones. And you could say that reality thing out there where we touch each other in the real world and we eat meals together and we have coffee together, that slightly receded and screens became reality. And that's reflected in the movies.
Right. Well, what about digital? Your feelings about digital. Do we go into that here?
Yeah, we do.
Is that a positive?
I have mixed feelings about digital. I remember when I saw Gladiator for the first time, and there's a beautiful shot which glides over the Colosseum in Rome, and you can see birds through the shot, and you can see tiny horses. If that had been a Hollywood movie like Cleopatra, they would have had to have a real airplane or a balloon or something and do that for real. But we know that was a digital shot. It was generated digitally. And I have to say, when I first saw that, it lost some of its excitement or its energy or its weight. And you know it's digital. You know some guy has spent 2 weeks in an edit suite doing that, you know, trimming buttons, So there's a loss there. I think there's a kind of loss of reality or of weight, but then there's a gain because cameras can go everywhere. We wouldn't have Toy Story. Look where the cameras seemed to be in Toy Story, in places where you couldn't put a real camera. So there's a kind of Avatar, which I loved. You know, so there's, like any new technology, we lose things and we gain things. We gain new angles, new points of view, but there's a certain loss of awe, I would say.
Do you think celluloid will ever totally go away?
I think celluloid will never go away for a very technical reason, to keep films in archives. Because if you... I remember Thelma Schoonmaker, who, as you know, does Martin Scorsese's editing. She was talking about Age of Innocence. They're a great film. And the only way they can store it is on film. If you store it on a disc, that disc might corrupt. So we still need celluloid to keep the future of cinema in place. But I don't know about projecting on celluloid. I think that's...
Yeah. Well, let's have a look. And don't forget to join us next week for the final chapter in this documentary journey we began last September. But right now, chapter 14 of the story of film and Odyssey, subtitled The 1990s, The First Days of Digital, Reality Losing Its Realness in America and Australia. Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. If you've been with us on Mondays in prime time over the past 3 months, you know we've been bringing you the U.S. television premiere of the British documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey. It's the vision and the work of the man sitting to my left, Mark Cousins. He created it, he wrote the series, he directed it, and he narrates it. Mark has been with me once a week since September 2nd, co-hosting each chapter. And tonight, with the 15th and final segment in the series, we head into the 21st century. Thanks, Mark, for being here to shepherd us.
My pleasure.
Through this journey.
It's been great.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, what do you see as the future of films?
I'm going to say I think something quite unusual in answer to that question. I think movie going is changing profoundly. We're watching films at home on our big TVs, etc. People watching on tiny... I mean, how stupid to watch Lawrence of Arabia on a telephone. Really stupid, but people do it nonetheless. However, I think the movies themselves, like deep down what they are, have hardly changed at all, actually. But what I mean by this is, right at the beginning, way back in 1895, you had Lumiere films, which were little portraits of reality, but you also had milieux, which were magic. And so at the beginning, movies were reality and magic all together. And when you look at the modern era, the films of the last 15 years, you have really, you know, loads of new documentary filmmakers like Michael Moore making Fahrenheit 9/11, etc. Loads of documentary. But then you have films like Mulholland Drive by David Lynch, pure dreamscapes. And the recent films that we've been seeing have got exactly the same tension between reality and dreams as the earliest movies did. So despite all the technology that we've been talking about over these weeks, despite all the social change that we've been talking about over these weeks, I think movies are still movies.
What do you think, going back from the beginning of film to the present time, what's the most significant change that's happened?
You could say that movies were always a window on the world, a sort of like when you look at a Fred and Ginger movie, there's a window on a fantasy world. If you look at the films of the 1940s and 1950s, there were windows on the world. But what I think that movies became over the years, not only a window, but like a mirror. They increasingly reflected ourselves back. They increasingly became more honest about human nature. Not everyone was beautiful anymore. Not everyone was Rita Hayworth. Not all lives were fantasy lives. So if you could say that they started like a window, but they became a mirror to show ourselves. And that, I think that's a really significant change. I think a very good change. I think that's called maturity. The art form is growing up. It's still young, but it's growing up.
I like the line Myrna Loy had in a movie when she said, everybody says movies should be more like real life. I think real life should be more like that.
I'm with you on that.
Now, let me ask you something, since I'm not going to be talking to you after the movie. What are you up to now? You finished this series in 2011,
yes,
right?
And I've made 3 or 4 films since then.
Right.
I'm one of the filmmakers who have benefited from this new technology that we've been talking about. I work with little cameras. I make 2 or 3 films a year. This year I made a sort of follow-up to the story of film, which is about children in cinema around the world. I made it in less than 2 months, and it went to the Cannes Film Festival, etc. So the fact that you can make movies so simply now means that I've been making lots.
Would you take on another project this big as the story of film?
It was a
6-year Odyssey. Would you ever do that again?
Never, never. It was exhausting. Even carrying the tripod. I remember I had a bruise here on my hip for ages afterward. Just the physical effort of carrying all the equipment to make a film like this. So I think it's up to someone else now to make another big project. I want to make a little project.
And thank you for doing it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that we were able to premiere it here.
I'm thrilled.
And to have you come and talk about it. You're very knowledgeable, and it's been a great pleasure.
Plus, I got to meet you.
Thanks so much. And here we go, and it's U.S. television premiere, Chapter 15 of the story of film, Odyssey, subtitled 2000 Onwards, Film Moves Full Circle, and the Future of Movies, by Mark Cousins.